Hello, welcome to the WEBSTER report. Where do we start here? It's been a while since I've done a live for various reasons, really. A lot of stuff going on, as it is with everybody since that thing that went on for about 3 years, were a bit of an IQ test that a lot of people failed on, really. But you know, we just have to try and move on. There's a lot of people contacting me now because all, you know, gas prices have gone up, and now the people are looking for that quick fix, that magic button. That was about 10 years ago. 8 years ago, we had a chance for that, but now it's going to be a fight. The trouble is, people are now following things that never worked from a long time ago, and they're missing the chances of on some remedies with this stuff. But it's not a laughing matter, because people are genuinely worried and upset. To help me try and decipher some of this mess is my good friend Alex. Mr. Brocklehurst, how are you doing, sir?
Peace. Yeah, I'm doing all right, Paul. It's a good day, isn't it? Really, the weather's been great. I don't know what it's like over in sunny Lee, but in sunny Darwin, it's been warm. Been out in the beer garden at the chapel. It's been warm, but I've had a great day from getting up this morning, 7 o'clock. Nice walk, cram lots in, very satisfying. Got to lead an active life, haven't you, Paul? That's one of the key things here.
Well, it's something I'm trying to get back into. You know, as you well know, Alex, it's not been an easy run for me last four years or so. Well, last 10 years have been pretty rough, but
yeah.
You know, the last 4 or 5 years with what's gone on with the COVID stuff and things like that, it's been harrowing, because family and friends are all, you know, there's a realization, is what I'm saying. I've seen a realization amongst a lot of people I know who had 3 jabs to go away, you know, when 2-3 weeks later they didn't need them, but they realised they'd been duped. But what do? You can't just keep going on at each other and saying, "Oh, see, I was right," or all that stuff. It's where we're at now, and what is going on with the world. We see things just completely ramping up. We've seen, but we do see this swathe of people now who they're really switching on to stuff, and they're studying hard. They're hitting some stuff that we only talked about, Alex, and they're going really in depth with it. You know, all the constitutional stuff that you were part of. You know, it's been a real switch around, because I spent 10 years trying to go around and explain that, you know, when I said your gas were free, I didn't actually think people would go, you know, "Well, your gas is free." They'd ask me a question. Rather than call me names and that, they'd ask questions. That was shocking, but now they can't afford to do that anymore. And we always said, didn't we, when it comes knocking on the door, that was when people would want to do something. I just hope that we've got enough time to be able to at least put the brakes on this thing. But you know, when I was going to start this show back up, it was difficult to try and see why to even start it up, because, you know, after going around the country doing conference talks, international radio shows, another radio show I used to do before, and this podcast, trying to just get people to think about what's happening. The reason why acting as a debtor in a debt-based economy is the wrong thing to do. You know, and my mum taught me to act as a debtor, work hard, pay your bills. If that's wrong, Alex, that means there has to be questions about everything I've been taught, because everybody knows that you've got to pay your bills, right? Isn't that true? Everybody pays the bills. And that's not what the right thing to do is. When I understood that, that was when my life started to unravel, because that meant everything was wrong. Then on top of that, banks don't lend money. Then on top of that, council tax only applies to commercial property. So how does it apply to my house then? How are they doing that? And then understanding that, well, Mr. Webster registered a property. Mr. is a business title. Businesses can only own title, so I don't even own property. And it gets put in commercial jurisdiction, which gives the county courts full authority. So I've been tucked up. I've been proper tucked up. And when I started to understand that, I thought understanding it was, because I understood it quite easily. It was really simple. But then when you try and tell people it, you saw that block. And I do get it. I do get it, because we're taught that you've got to work hard and pay bills. But there was no openness, only within a few people. And I knew then that to try and explain this stuff, I had to know what I was talking about, at least for the bits that I was talking about. At this moment, people are jumping on this gyro stuff, but they're saying it doesn't work. And then when I ask them for a picture of what they've sent, they're showing me a bank gyro, not a joint gyro credit, a bank gyro. They're writing at a 45-degree angle and putting a stamp on it. And they don't know why they're doing it, but they're thinking that that's doing something with the bill when it completely isn't, because if it isn't a joint gyro, they're treating you as a debtor, which is a shopkeeper. And it's a completely different instrument, and you can't change it. But you can see people now who are jumping on this thing. So, Alex, how far would you have to go back to?
Right. So let me address that point you made, right? Because I think it would help to clarify why we're in such a mess as a society. So, in terms of what you just described and why people are resistant and they're not able to get to the bottom of it and should we say click onto it in the way that you have, the pieces have come together for you, the light switch has come on. Do you remember that old phrase, too many chiefs, not enough Indians? The bottom line is, we've got so many people with opinions, authority, no matter who gave them that authority or not. Someone on the internet speaks like an expert as if they're an authority. Nobody knows how to back anything up, make coherent arguments. It's all very fragmented in cyberspace. So it's hard for people to escape what I would call a jungle. And in fact, I'd probably go further and call it not just a jungle, but a labyrinth. It's a labyrinth, and it's extremely difficult for people to navigate it. And so I think what we need to be able to do is help them to navigate that labyrinth. Basically, we've got to get the right entry points to be able to get them to grasp the core ideas.
Well, the thing is, you've got to beat the panic first, though, because people can't afford to pay this bill. They now want to know what the alternatives are. And what you mentioned there is, some people have been in touch with me, and they've watched a TikTok video, and some girls said, just change your meters, right? And don't tell anyone because it's all free. That's not true. And people are saying that people are doing this. And then you've got people backing that up by saying, well, I've not paid for so long. I've not paid council tax for so many years, and I'm going away with it. When we did the gas, it wasn't to get away with it. It was to actually be with clean hands. It was actually to do it legally, to set the bill off, to lower national debt. If we all set off, we'd balance the books. If the books are balanced, bloody hell, the sky's the limit, Alex. We'd have better infrastructure, which would invite more businesses, which would invite more jobs, which means we've got more taxes, so more revenue to make this society even better. And yet we have been taught to gift all our monies, all our equity away. We've been told to just gift it away and ignore we've got it. And, that starts with going for a mortgage and banks not lending money. If people understood how the banks actually worked, like Henry Ford said, the people would be swinging from lampposts because the public are being raped financially. And it starts off from the banking system and the judiciary working together, and the politicians are just bought puppets. Then you've got the police and security services on top of that do their beck and call. And it's all it's the people's fault we're in this mess. The national debt is because of the people paying bills. How stupid does that sound when you say it out loud? But it's the truth.
Yeah, people. The thing is, because it is so complex out there, it's like when you start tugging on a thread on a garment, the whole garment can unravel. So people are really concerned. You see, where's this going to lead? There's that many opinions. If you don't believe you can solve a problem, in some ways, you're better off not even starting to try, because all you do, usually big problems are made up of smaller problems, right? And you're going to break them down systematically. And you could get to a point where you've got a management strategy for how things are. And it's usually the ostrich syndrome, pretend it isn't happening. Because at least what you can do then is postpone the pain, so you think, till later on and continue to be alive now, because you're alive now. So when you do the calculus, when you do the mathematics on a simple level, it's, I want to continue to live as sanely as possible now. So rather than opening up this can of worms, I'll have this simplified universe that I live in. Now, at one time, it was relatively easy for people to do that because life was relatively simple and most people are on the same page. It's got harder and harder to do that now, Paul. So, you know, if you're going to swim against the tide now, there are going to be serious repercussions. And we know that from personal experience without going into detail. The more you challenge big power, the more big power is going to come looking for you. So big power is teaching us all the time, shut up, because if you don't, we'll cancel you anyway. So the messages that come from this often unaccountable power, often unelected power, increasingly now WEF, WHO, all these other bodies, you know, the EU, no accountability. They can regulate for us. They can construct reality. They can talk about a climate crisis and a few MPs can vote on it. They can construct narratives that can constrain our reality. We're forced to live in the consequences of that reality. So when COVID came, when the government decides through some bogus science, we're going to shut all the pubs down, we're going to shut down social and cultural and community life, we have a problem. Then they police it. And then if people go against that, they'll threaten them with fines and imprisonment. So the difficulty you've got is people will try and duck and weave for as long as possible. And they don't really know how to come together against that sort of tyranny. So I think people are genuinely perplexed. And if they try and sort things out too much in their own mind, there is no solution at the level of the mind because the problem is too big. So people go back to what they know, which is, well, actually, I know I walk out my front door every day and I know the shop's at the end of the road and I know I can get a tin of butter beans from there, even though I don't like butter beans, and survive. So that's the bottom line. Now, your more sophisticated stuff is much harder to attain. Most people are living for the weekend and a couple of holidays a year. And as long as they can continue to do that, that's why they go, hey, this COVID vaccine, oh man alive, I've got to take it so I can go on holiday. Because for them, it's the line of least resistance. It's the ostrich syndrome. Now, how are you going to get people to change that is a big question. Because each one of them, each individual is doing their personal calculus. They're saying, right, I want to front end my life now and have these benefits. That's why some people take pensions early and some people never retire. Because they're always balancing between, do I want to live now or do I want to live later? If you live now and make no provision for later, you could run out of money and be in trouble. But if you live it the other way around, you might save £1 million and then cark it before you get a chance to enjoy it. And everyone's in that dilemma and nobody knows how to answer that question for anybody else. No textbook could be written with a definitive answer for you, me, or anybody else. We've got to work this stuff out ourselves and everybody does it differently. And this means you'll never get people on the same page about how to answer that question. Therefore, you won't get people marching in the same step. And of course, all systems that try and force people to march in the same step become tyrannical. So we're coming back to, Paul, if I may, the simple principle of free will. And if free will really is free will, we've got to give people the opportunity to choose evil. Or apathy or ignorance.
Well, let's be honest, that was one of the reasons why God said don't eat from that tree. Because there would be those consequences, whether we like it or not.
Yeah, not because he's some tyrant saying, I'm telling you, don't do this, or you'll get a good spanking. But if you go down that route, guys, it's not going to end well for you. Because I care about you, I don't want you to, you know. But that's the beautiful thing about it.
There's so much to weigh up when you think about things like that, because, you know, if there wasn't a higher moral standing from God, we wouldn't have, everything would be subjective. So my moral highs might not be your moral highs. You know, this is why we ended up with the places like Sodom and Gomorrah, where anything went. You know, anything you can think of went. Well, they didn't know they was doing anything wrong because there was no law. That's all absolutely changed since the cross, because in the scriptures it says it'll be written in your heart and in your minds. So we know now, we've got a better understanding what is right and wrong. There's plenty of things I've done wrong and I'm known I'm doing wrong. You know, it's how we justify it, and it's the heart, isn't it? The heart wants what the heart wants. It's those type of things. But it's this greed and this desire that has run this society. And then, you know, the first breath that we take and we breathe in this society, and all of a sudden, the people you trust the most are saying, this is what life is. You know, I've told the story many times when I said to my mum when I was 7, Mum, why do I have to get a job when I get older? Because I'd rather play on my bike. And she rhymed off all these things about getting a house, about getting married, about having kids, having a car and going on holiday. And I said, why? And she said, that's life. And she mentioned paying bills and all that. And now I'm understanding that it wasn't the right thing to do. I'm also understanding that if you go to Eton, you taught the bills of exchange out by the age of 13. So if you're being taught that at these upper end schools, and the people who come out of these schools end up in positions of leadership in this bloody country, they're being put there for a reason, and it's because they know what the game is. So you've got councils, instead of, you know, they've laid off all their own workers, because we used to have good council bloody workers, all local lads and girls that do a day's graft. But now with those local lads and girls are now subcontractors, and we're paying subcontractors when we've already paid, because the council tax is being used to do that. So they're sitting on taxes that they've applied for the community, and then they're charging council tax again on top. So you've already paid for your police, fire, ambulance, and your bins. You've already paid for it in your taxes. But people think council tax pays for that. No, council tax pays for emptying of bins and fire and police and ambulance for commercial stuff. You know, if somebody's at home in the private, that's already paid for. That's NHS. But they like to subsidise stuff because, you know, people can go into a shop and get overexcited over a Ted Baker handbag or something like that. I know somebody who's done that. So, you know, society's been given to us. And it's only when you stop and you get off and you go, hang on a minute, there's something not right here. And then everybody goes past you on the same merry-go-round, pointing at you, Alex, saying, you're a dickhead, you're a knob, when they're not even looking at what's going on in their life until that knock comes at the door. When that knock comes at the door, that's when it changes.
I'm with you. Now, you know, what you were saying there about Eton and so on, compared to the regular schooling system that most of us are subjected to. This is obviously the playbook of J.D. Rockefeller, 1909, developing the school along the lines of a prison-based institution, but also the idea. There was a guy. There was a guy called John Taylor Gatto, and he talked about this in terms of pedagogy, which is basically the theory of education. Because what Rockefeller had said was that basically, logistically speaking, these useless eaters are going to outgrow us logistically in pretty short order, so we won't be able to maintain the competitive advantage of our children over them. So what happened was they had to drive this wedge between, and funnily enough, so that's Rockefeller. But then there was a well-known well, most people won't have heard of him, but a German critical theorist called Jürgen Habermas. And Habermas developed a lot of theories, and one of them, he made a distinction. So he was a critical theorist and a sociologist, and he made a lot of contributions in these domains. But he made a distinction between something called system, which is what we're talking about, the big system, the macro level system that we're all a part of, which you might see, particularly in terms of, say, Western ideology, and it all coming together like as a one world project, let's just say. And then life world. And the life world is more on the micro level that we all live within. Now, originally, education offered the prospect of connecting one's personal life world to the system in a meaningful way, so that you develop an education within yourself, which gave you the tools to translate your personal life world of interests, motivations, enjoyment, skills, all that to the infrastructure, so that you could operate on the infrastructure, get the most out of the infrastructure, maximize the benefits to everybody in society. But what Rockefeller successfully did with his move in favor of the elite's children was to sever the connection between individual life worlds of most people, their subjective experience, their micro level existence, and the systems. And what it did, it retained the advantage of the elites, because in the elite schooling, they didn't separate the life world from the system, which enabled their kids to be able to bridge the gap between the life world and the system. That's how they've maintained competitive advantage. Even though there's miles more of us than them, none of us have been empowered to bridge across from our personal life world, our personal local community and social experience, into a successful translation towards pushing the buttons and pulling the levers that make society work. And this is why, when that happens, it's the people in positions of power who design how the system works, the cogs, and how they're connected and how the machinery works. So most people have been socialized to think, well, I have no influence over these cogs. I haven't been given a template to influence these cogs. Bankers do. Other people do in these larger scale organizations. So my only choice is to trust them, because I don't have the competence, and I don't have the infrastructure, and I don't have the capacity to acquire the knowledge. So what's happened here, Paul, much to your frustration, is for whatever reason, even though elitist education would have prevented you, as you often said to yourself, is it 7 GCSEs? Yeah. What prevented you, right, within that system? You were curious enough, call it a divine quirk, an act of grace. All the pain and suffering you went through in your life led you to a place, because what happened? Your personal life world was so impacted by this system, it so disrupted your core circumstances, it so intruded and violated your boundary and got inside your boundary that it deranged your life world. And you had to put it back together again. But when you were in the act of putting that life world of yours back together again, in reconstructing yourself and healing, you had to work out what had monstered you. You had the kind of brain that enabled you to make those connections and learn very quickly. And you know, you didn't have to read the Bills of Exchange Act. You just need to get the basic idea, check the relevant sections, and then it all came together because you knew what monstered you. So you were able to build a picture in a way that most people don't, as an expression of your own journey, because of what disrupted your life world. Now you've got that connection, so to speak, between those worlds, but not thanks to the education system, thanks to the pain of your personal experience, mate.
Well, I always remember as a 10-year-old in a history lesson, the curriculum was a bit more freer back then, and the teacher wrote Bills of Exchange Act 1882 on the blackboard. So I did the date and I wrote the Bills of Exchange Act 1882 and I underlined it, I put my pen down and I leaned back in the chair because we were now going to discuss that subject before we did anything else. And as I put my pen down, I said, "This is a waste of my time, I'll never use it."
But there you go. How interesting is that?
But when you said I didn't have to read the Bills of Exchange, when my mate showed me what that check was, he said, "You've got to understand it's a check. It's a check of worth, but the agent, which was British Gas then, can't get access to those funds. So whatever utility agent it is, If they're not sending you a joint gyro, they're treating you as a customer, which is a debtor, a shopkeeper. So if you got the joint gyro, all you have to do is endorse it, sign and date it, give it them back. Nothing else. You know, people have spoke about the reason why I put stamps on the first document. Well, when I put documents into a court, if I don't pay the stamp duty, it's not my document once I've put it in the court. It's not mine anymore. But if I pay the stamp duty, it's my document. They can't make that go missing. They can't take it out of something. Like you see a lot of court bundles. You know, I've known people put court bundles in like that and they've got them back like that because they took the meat and potatoes out of it because it's not it's not yours. They don't do it with their own documents, but they do it with people like us who don't play in the system. But the thing that I'd heard all about it's like people are telling me now about straw man because it's your capital letters name and all that. We weren't scared of that because for me, all I could see is that was my sports car. That was my Monopoly piece. Mr. Paul Webster is my Monopoly piece. Who's got a greater shout on my Monopoly piece? Courtroom, nobody should have because it's mine. But you've still got to show and prove where I've engaged in commerce. Well, if you're making a liability claim against Mr. Paul Webster and it's for gas and you've sent me a joint gyro credit, you can't be claiming that I owe it you when you sent me this. So I sign and date it and give it you back. All you should do is process it, which will tell HMRC that the funds have been used. They'll balance the books, which will lower the national debt. I couldn't see a downside to it. But when you've got the agent telling you, yeah, we've received your gyro, but no payment, so you end up explaining it to the point where you get to want to speak to somebody in the financial department at Centrica in Staines, Middlesex, and they know who you are, even though you've never spoken to them before, but you can't get access to it. So I knew all along that process was 100%. When you have a legal clerk tell a magistrate when they said to me, the magistrate put a glass on the end of the nose and said, bills of exchange? And before I could say anything, the legal clerk looked up and said, yes, ma'am, that's a legal remedy we don't deal with in this jurisdiction. He was sticking with the warrant, even though that the gas agent stood in the dock and talked about money. Money, that's all he talked about. So he stuck with the warrant and adjourned it because he just told the magistrate I brought the cure for what they were saying I owed him. So I knew it was 100%. So with the bills of exchange, then that's all I needed to know is, so how is it simply working? How does it work simply? How is my property being applied a commercial tax? And it's because, as far as I could work out, it's because Mr. Webster registered a property. Mr., a business, a shopkeeper, cannot own a brick. It can own title. So I own title on a property that is classed as commercial because that's the jurisdiction they put it in, and that gives full jurisdiction to county courts. And that's why the judge could say, I'm going to sell your house and split it. And when I said, where do you get your authority? That's when they showed me by sending armed police. So all of that taught me some very valuable lessons 14 years ago. It was the blinders were off. You really are doing this. And the more questions I asked, and especially when I started to talk about the bills, wherever I went, Leeds, Nottingham, around the country, radio shows, tell me where I'm wrong so I can stop being this dickhead and talking about it. Nobody could because I know it's true. That's how simple it is. So people are paying for gas, water and electric 3 times over, Alex. They work, that work is then taxed, and then they pay again. And then they wonder why there's no money. It's because they're compensating and taking that equity. They're running the businesses down. Since COVID happened, loads of middle-class businesses have gone. There's working class. There's like working poor now. Them poor. There's no middle class. It's being deleted.
Yeah.
Now you've got this dilemma. I mean, if you could bring it back up to date, Tommy Robinson's been arrested. Whoa, who saw that coming, huh? You know, it's all distraction. It's all things that are going on that is relevant. But what happens if they collapse the economy? The bills of exchange, everything, it's gone. So people have to switch on quick, and they've got to do something quick. But it's
Well, I don't think they will, Paul. I mean, no, the problem is, no matter how urgent the situation is, it doesn't matter if you've got no agency over it. If you can't pull these levers and push these buttons and change it, you're kind of an idle spectator. It doesn't matter how much distress. You can kind of go, oh, no, it's going to happen, it's going to happen, it's going to happen, but you still can't stop it. You're still powerless. So you need to make peace with the fact that you're powerless, that the inevitable thing's going to happen. It's like that old game, Kaplunk, or whatever that other game was, where you're building up that tower in your Jenga, and you don't know when it's going to go, but then you can see it's going to go, and it's going to go soon enough. But you see, you've got to be disciplined in your emotions and go, well, I'm not going to let myself get aroused by that and say, so what can I really do now? What strikes me, a lot of people now talk about a post-truth world, right? I'm not going to get into the boring theoretical and contemporary discussion about that, because you could go on about it all day and get too technical. But what I'll do is connect it up with our old mate Jesus, because in John 14:6 he said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh to the Father but by me. Now, if the truth in this world of ours, and don't forget Pontius Pilate said, well, what is truth to Jesus? So even then, there were these questions where people say, well, it's all right talking about truth, but what is truth? And the postmodernists today go, oh, well, my truth, your truth, everyone's truth. You know, everyone's truth is different. So it's become so relativist that nobody can access the truth anymore, but everyone's got an opinion about what it is. So if you're in the marketplace of ideas, raising your voice, trying to say, this is the truth, this is the truth. Well, Islam's doing it, Sikhism's doing it, all the other religions are doing it. The communists were doing it. Capitalists are doing it. Everyone's got an opinion about it. So how do you know who to follow? Truth has become problematic. Jesus talks about the way as well, which is obviously like a path of ethics and how to conduct yourself in life. That in itself is a bit of a narrow path, because he talks about narrow path. But one thing that people can still relate to is life. And the reason they can relate to life is not because they can relate to life in the way that Jesus talked about it, but because they understand their own mortality. Every time you have a health scare, every time you see somebody close to you have a health scare, every time you have a loved one or a friend close to you die, death is there. And it was part of, you know, the design after the fall. But it did have this beautiful thing which came with that sting in the tail, that death is a great reminder of finality, that I make my decisions now. So it's like, how much do I want to live and how much do I want to die? You don't need a theological framework in the first instance to answer that. You don't need a model of truth to answer that, because life force is life force. It wants to carry on living unless it gets beaten down that much that it waves the white flag of surrender and chooses to die. The spirit is broken, the will is broken, the person, you know, does themselves in or just gives up. We see it with animals sometimes, a zebra fighting against a crocodile. How long will it? And in the end, it'll give up the ghost because it just gets exhausted. We've got this resilience. And I think if we focus on truth, it's important, but virtually everyone on social media is peddling their opinion as truth. So it's very, very difficult to make headway on that level. Doesn't mean we shouldn't try, but I think we need to focus more on life. Do you want to live? Do you enjoy being alive? And if the person says, no, I'm miserable, I think there's nothing to live for, COVID's happened, or my prospects get eroded, well, then you've got to say to that person, come on. And we can only do that for each other. We've got to build a community of people who want to live, who don't want to be part of this death cult. And I don't think in the first instance that we can afford to focus on truth. Truth's important, but we need to smuggle it through the back door, because people can't even be receptive to truth when they're flagging and half dead. We're under assault. We're under attack from all sides. Food chain, chemtrails, the lots. The crisis, what they call the cost of living crisis. So we're being ground down. So we've got to galvanise people first of all. So for me, the entry point is: how much do you want it? How much do you want to? How much do you want to live? Or do you just want to pack it in, give up, and wave the white flag and surrender?
I think it's just got to get tough for people first, because people actually, I know people now who've, they've worked bloody hard all year. They've had their ups and downs, and now they've managed to get away on holiday for a bit. I know several people who are sunning it up away, and it's like, well, there's nothing wrong. They've got on a plane, they're sat by the pool, they're having a few cocktails and a few beers. There's nothing wrong in the world, Alex. Euros have just finished, Premiership's coming up. We're going to get the bread and circuses back. It's only until it starts knocking on your door, and I can just see it ramping up now for the second part of this year. When you see, there's a lot of questions about this assassination attempt on Trump, but there's a lot of questions also of the amount of people that aren't talking about it. It's very strange. There's a president, an ex-president, been shot. They tried to kill him. The Secret Service knew this fella was lying on this roof for 57 minutes. They'd stopped him with a bag and a rangefinder. And people were telling him there's a fella up there on that roof with a gun. They knew he was there, yet nothing was done. So it raises questions. Has it been set up by the Trump lot to make it look like? Because, until he ducked down under that podium and he got up with that blood, nobody saw what had happened. The crowd's reaction behind him was very strange. They all know what gunshots seem like. And, the majority of them got the phones out. It's very strange when things like this are happening blatantly in front of people's faces. That satanic ritual with the Olympics, you can't, it's not like they're trying to pretend it's something different anymore, Alex. There's something fundamentally changed. You touched on about how do we know which one to follow? We know there's at least 700 religions that follow Jesus, and none of them agree. So I know from sitting through 15 years of left footer and right footer services, I knew the Catholics have 10 minutes longer for a bit of a wafer, a bit of wine. Yeah, it's the same sermon, the same hymns that we sat through. So it was 15 years of the same. So there was nothing for me. I've been inducted into Taoism. There was nothing there. I did mediumship, and even though I was getting results with people, it wasn't changing me. I wanted to know what was after this life. I didn't know what it was, but I knew there was something. All these liars that have taught me all these lies, Alex, where my life is unraveled about paying bills, about everything like that. All these religions are in bed with all these financial institutions and governments, and they all said that one message in the gospel is wrong. There's only one way. And I thought, hang on a minute, that book that I've never read, that message says, I'm the way, the truth, the life. Nobody gets to the Father but by me. All these liars said that's wrong. You've now got the Catholics saying it's okay for same-sex marriages and da-da-da. Do you know, Alex, how many times we had this conversation? We know gay people. We've got friends who are gay. It's up to them. I don't care. But you can't, if you're a Christian, you're following that Bible, it's what God said. I had to stop doing things I was doing. And it wasn't because I had to, it's because I understood, I want to. It completely changed me. That's why I knew that message being so unique and all these lies having to go at it meant intellectually I understood it was different. But I couldn't just believe, because the message is, you can't do anything. Doesn't matter how many times you go to church, helping people, feeding the poor, doesn't matter what you do. If you don't believe in what Jesus did, none of that matters. That was so simple to understand. But how do you just believe? I couldn't until I did. And that was a massive experience and a change for me that none of the mediumship, none of the religions that I've looked into even touched on. You know, I remember 11, 11, 11 being stood at Avebury at the standing circles and Druids are banging drums, and I'm going, what the bloody hell am I doing here? Because I felt out of place. It didn't feel right. But since my dad was killed when I was 16, I knew there was something after this life. I just didn't know what it was. And then when I saw everything materially that I had in this world just being taken, and I'm using their law, their rules, and they're still ignoring it. And it's happened to so many people. You know, my mate Anthony Carlin, he's just had quite a bit of a big win as a feather in his cap, because he's been fighting for his house for over a decade as well. His case law, my judge turned over and said, I can't see that. I take the bank's word that you owe them money. So now you can take somebody's word that their claim is true. So I can take you to court tomorrow, Alex, tell a judge that you owe me 10 grand, and the judge goes, I believe you, Mr. Webster. Alex, pay him. That doesn't work like that. But when you're seeing courts who have used armed police, who have used police throughout other hearings to intimidate and then side with banks who can't prove they've lent money because they don't lend money, you see how honed this fraud is. Then you see on top of that council tax being frauded. Then you see how the gas, water and electric, then you understand why magistrates call Thursdays money day, because it's all fines, all rubber stamps. So they're making money hand over fist, and it's because us idiots have been taught to allow them to do that. It's bonkers, man. It's bonkers.
Well, I mean, we're describing, well, you are there, the process or some of the facets of what the breakdown of society involves, in the West in particular. But it's not just the breakdown of society in a way. It's, in a sense, it's a breakdown of reality. Now, if you see reality as atoms, subatomic particles, and the like, then of course we're not breaking that level of reality down, unless something sort of psycho-spiritual is going on in the background. But you are breaking reality down as most people experience it on a common sense level, because for them, reality is the structures which contain our everyday existence, the routines that we inhabit, by which we've always navigated. And suddenly those rules are changing. So now, because of the laws around money laundering that they decide to emphasize, even if you put a few £100 in the bank or want to withdraw cash, you're virtually a criminal who has to give their inside leg measurements. And they've managed to successfully instate that upon everyone at a policy level through the private sector, through the bank. So the governments don't even have to get a tannoy out to tell people what the new rules are. They just get implemented. And because people need money, they submit to what's required in order to get the money that they need. And they go, well, you can't get it through cash. Okay, well, I'll get it digitally. Because life's a contact sport. You still need to eat your food. Whether it's cheap McDonald's non-burgers that are not real food or exquisite banquets, it doesn't really matter what choices you're making around on that level of reality. It's still being constrained at a higher level. The very fundamental things that we used to be able to take for granted, like exemplary customer service because businesses wanted your business and had to compete with other businesses. Now they're like one big monopoly. You can just say, yeah, it's us against the punter. It's the big system operator against the individual. So the total flow has changed. And people, in order to survive, because we're in survival mentality now, it's post-apocalyptic in that sense. We're in the middle of a zombie horror apocalypse. People will do what they need to do to survive. They just don't realize yet that that's what they're doing. They'll cling on to the edge of the mountain by the fingertips. They were clinging on by their arms. Then it went down. They were running out of energy to their hands. Now they're clinging on by the edge of the fingernails. And they'll carry on doing it because no one wants to die. That's why death, pain, fear, all these negatives are probably the best chance that we've got of people turning it around. It's almost like, how far down do you have to go into the miry pit before you realize, like the prodigal son that you were mentioning with me not too long ago. It's almost like we've got to get to the state of kind of remembering that I had a humanity and a dignity once when I was lower in a pecking order, lower in a hierarchy. I wasn't climbing up the greasy pole, but I was doing okay. And actually, I can stop trying to climb up the greasy pole. I can just go, hey, if I went back to my dad's, I had food, I could have a nice warm bath, fresh clothing, I've got love all around me, I can have modest expectations. But because people have been aspiring for so long now, they don't know any different. They're all climbing the mutual greasy pole and stepping on top of other people. And it's a survival game. And until we get ourselves out of that mentality, which is primitive psychology, Paul, it's fight, flight, it's central nervous system triggered.
Well, that's the programming method, isn't it? Because from childhood, they've targeted that fight or flight constant, because you were constantly in a fight or flight. You're constantly tense at all times, because it's, oh, am I too fat? Am I too thin? Am I not handsome enough? Have I got the wrong type of beard? Am I bald? And have I got longer? And I shouldn't. It's all these things that we question, and it's society that's questioning us. I look back as a kid, and my mum and dad, who grew up with nothing, worked bloody hard, but I had everything, Alex. I was a spoiled kid. I had the name stuff and everything. It had to be name stuff. I had 4 bikes to choose from. I had 2 motorbikes at one time. I'd never understood what money was until I had to go out and earn it. Yeah. And then you get an understanding of it. But it's only later on in life that you realise what your parents actually did. But in between all that, she lied to me. Now, this is the point where people jump in and go, no, she didn't lie. She didn't lie. She did lie to me, but she believed those lies to be true. Why? Because they were taught to her as well. And she learned those lies. She was 15 when the war finished, right? So the education system was next to nothing. Then after the war, we got an education system. Well, now all of a sudden we're taught things, and we were taught to have a nation of workers where my mum would say, don't pay that bill until you get the red one. Don't give him anything till they due it, whereas she shouldn't have been paying it. And I know now that me and my mum would have really had some big arguments over some of this stuff. My best mate, when he did the gas stuff, he'd written on the glass panels on his van with a glass pen. So he'd written with a glass pen on his glass all about Brexit and gas and how you shouldn't be paying it and da. And he did a video as well, and he posted it on his Facebook, and his mum saw it, and he went round to his mum's that night, and he says, "Hiya, mum, you all right?" And she was just really, yeah, okay. That's how really dismissive of him. And he said, "Are you all right?" And she just looked at him, Alex, and said, "I've never been so disappointed. You don't pay your bills." That's how much the lie has been taught to be true. And it's all I can say is that when people are saying that, when people are dealing with the council and the council is saying they have no money, they are telling lies. They have no money for the shops, for the commercial aspect. They're telling the truth. So Mr. Webster goes and asks for help from the council. That's the shopkeeper, the debtor, asking for help. It's not Paul. It's not one of the people who live in the borough who's took the taxes, who the council are actually employed by and employed to help. Everything's been turned upside down, Alex. We've all been turned into shopkeepers. We can't make profit.
That's interesting. Everything's been turned upside down, right? Because Jesus talks about an upside down kingdom.
Exactly.
He turned it upside down by entering Jerusalem on a donkey. So he tried to turn it right way up again, and effectively everything that he did.
He bound the strong man.
He inverted what had been inverted, and then of course the attempt has been made to invert it again by that mission creep of that agenda kicking in again. But of course, the other part of this is something we've spoke about before, which in fancy terms, in New Testament terms, is called realized and unrealized eschatology. Eschatology is usually end times in Christianity, but Christianity has a message where Jesus, when he came, he said the kingdom is already The kingdom is like all around you. It's here because he was the harbinger of the kingdom. So even though he kind of, he ascends and then he's going to return, that's the not yet. That's the bit that's to come. But we're supposed to, we pray the Our Father, don't we? Our Father which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So in some ways, we've got to explore, where do we start? Do we start with his kingdom in heaven as a template, or do we start saying, well, we've got to build some kind of kingdom on earth that we think resembles it, but we don't know what it is yet? But Jesus reveals some principles. He said, like, love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you, and do the opposite, turn it upside down. The normal person is reactive when they get attacked. If they're challenged, undermined, they often viciously respond. So that's what we would call, in Pauline terms, the Apostle Paul, living in the flesh. Angering somebody provokes anger in us. We respond in kind. We're living according to the flesh. So we're living in this maelstrom of increasingly difficult circumstances in a culture that's got that much degeneracy. You look all around. Jesus said in Matthew 24, because of the increase in lawlessness at the end, the love of most people will grow cold. He also said in Luke's gospel, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on the earth? Expecting the answer, no. So we know in times of severe tribulation, according to what Jesus said, it's going to be very, very hard for human beings to have the bandwidth to not just react, not just defend, not just be in ostrich syndrome. So the pressure on us at the moment is monumental. We're all divided. The churches are largely compromised. The message that they give is often compromised by these televangelists making millions, ripping people off just like the charities. So it's very difficult for people to distinguish truth from error. Even when they have an official message, they try to say, my message is better than your message. So the difficulty that we've got now, we could get into a council of despair and say there's no hope for us. But I think there is. And the answer has got to be, if it's about this Jesus character and the kingdom coming and his will being done on earth as it is in heaven, we can't do that in our own strength. Like you said, Paul, we, in the flesh, we are defeated. We're defeated by God's enemy, who's our enemy, who hates everything that God created, and he hates us as the pinnacle of God's creation. So whispering in our ear all the time, do this, do that, go this way, go that way, attack back, do this, undermine, destroy. And we have to make an effort to not do that. But that effort isn't in us because we're in the flesh. So for Christians, of course, we're supposed to live according to the Spirit, because we, living in the flesh, we're going to get the results that everybody else gets. Bedlam, chaos, destruction. We'll be part of the carnage. So personally, if you ask me, there's many, many ways to go in this ideological seabed. There's so many ideas, so many voices in this marketplace that nobody can tell just based on the message alone. Like you said many times, if I don't open the Bible and read it, and then say I don't read any of the Gospels, I don't hear the words of Jesus to my own soul, but I write off the Bible and say, oh, it's just a book written by men, like another religious book, like any other book, then how can it impact me? How can I hear that voice that's communicating with me when the Bible's gathering cobwebs? So people have to make a choice to be in communion with God, to seek that which transcends this messed up experience. Because personally, I don't think we're going to turn the ship around. I don't think we're going to turn the ship around, Paul.
It came to the point for me, Alex, was, like if the fundamental thing of paying bills was wrong, then that meant that everything I've ever been taught, everything from the education system in particular, I've got to reevaluate. That's not to say all the information was false. There's a lot of truth in it, but it's mixed with a lot of falseness. And then you've got all these other options, and you don't know what is the best option. I knew that the religions were all pretty much the same. When you defined it, there was 3 main religions, but there was one very unique message. And I'd never read the Bible. So all the conspiracy theories that I actually gone and researched to the point that most of the theories went away and it was just a conspiracy. There's a lot of people don't understand that there's only two people required for a conspiracy. Now, when there's a conspiracy theory, that we theorize that these two people have come together and conspired. Well, once we start to find information that shows evidence of conspiracy, it's no longer a theory. We know there's a conspiracy. It's just proving the facts of what happened from that. So when you see the things of JFK, 9/11, the major ones, you see that it's not a theory. There's a conspiracy behind all of them. So we can drop the theory when it comes to it. What we've got with the biggest conspiracy theory ever is the Bible, and it's the only one that I've never looked at. So it's a theory. It's written by men. It's this. It's that. I've heard it all. I've heard it. I've heard everything about it. I went to a Church of England school. I remember the stories. I remember the scriptures, but they never meant anything because I'd never read it for myself. It was somebody telling me what things meant. When I started to read it, Alex, as you know from many conversations we've had, that the text in the Bible does not match to what I'm being told, wasn't matched to what I was being told at school, even though we didn't really go in depth at school. It was just going through the passages. But I've been to churches, mate, and they're talking about things that just aren't in the Bible. And then when I've questioned it, it's what we believe. Well, I don't really care what you believe. I want to know what the truth is. People say, well, that's what you believe, or this is my truth. I don't want to know what your truth is. I want to know what the truth is, because the truth stands on its own, whether you hide it or try to hide it, or you try and help it. It doesn't matter. It stands. So when I went and read that, it was a very unique message. And then when I'd read it a few times, I understood that from the Old Testament to the New Testament, that it's all about Jesus. The Old Testament's the promise. The New Testament is the fulfillment. I thought, it's one big story. It's all the way through. Nobody's ever told me this before. And then there's people saying that there's different things. One of the things that we've talked about is that we grew up, or I grew up, hearing that Satan and Lucifer were the same entities. When in Scripture it clearly tells you, when you break the Scripture down, people have often said, "Oh, you don't divide the word correctly." Isaiah 14:12 says, "Lucifer, son of the morning." Now, the morning, a morning star, was a fallen angel called Shakar, who was a Canaanite god. And he went with human females, created Nephilim. So if he's the son of a morning star, that means he is Nephilim. He's not a fallen angel. They say, oh no, he was smoked down from heaven. In that same passage, he says, I will ascend and be like the Most High. He's not up there. He's down here. So that's in the text, and that's what the text says. But then somebody says, no, what God meant to say here was, it's another man telling me that that's wrong, when the text completely says Lucifer is completely his own entity. And yeah, he did want to rise to be like God, but that's no different to others. Nimrod tried it at Babel. So we've seen this pattern, and it's only when you read the word yourself that you understand that there's a difference between what we've been taught from pulpit or in schools compared to what is actually in that Bible. And you can have arguments about the different translations and I knew, because of my autism, I had to find the best English version I could find. It's not going to be perfect, but I've got to find the best. And the Geneva Bible and the King James original, going from the lexicon used to the Greek and to the Hebrew, it was damn near the best I could get. And I love the Old English anyway. So it was made for me, and it clicked. And obviously it wasn't me that was understanding, it was just being shown to me. And I'd never bothered reading it before. And it's not because, me and you or anybody else who's been born again, Alex, is special. It's what that word does. Those words just do something. And I'd never read it. And it just gave me this insight, and it showed me that all them liars, Paul, all them liars, all those liars that have done all this to you, they've used police, they've done all this, and they said, that's wrong. Who do you believe? and why don't you just let go? And that was the tilting point, Alex. There was no point holding on to anything in this world. The world had gone because everything that I'd held dear to me was false, or had a falsehood to it, if that makes sense. You know,
Yeah.
all my childhood, all those wonderful, beautiful memories, 6 weeks of football, playing football all summer, and no worries and everything. And then, you know, you're getting married, and then you're giving all that up and doing things stupidly because you don't know what life's about. And it shows you, because straight away I'm living a lie. Work hard, pay your bills. I was taught that from the age of 7, from when I asked questions. So if we're being taught that, that means all our life is off. It's like with theology. If you're 0.001 of a degree off at your starting point, and you travel 100 miles, how far are you off when you've traveled 100 miles? So I couldn't afford that, because I knew when everything had gone in this life and there was nothing left here for me, Alex. You know, I've told my story before. There was nothing left here. And I just went, I've had enough. Why don't you just come and take me? There's nothing here. You know, I don't see anything after this world other than, you know, it could have been vibrations. It could be raising myself. It could be becoming a god with you know, all these things that were plausible, from the Gnostic all the way through. You know, how many groups have we been in where the mysticism and all that, and they get mixed up with paganism and all this kind of stuff. I've been through all that. You know, I just couldn't find the answer. Then I found the answer, and it was unique. It was different. And it's the only thing that's been different that all this world disagrees with. And it was because of that was a strong indicator for me. And I always say to people, everybody's got their opinions, right? And I have people who are close to me who say, well, I'm entitled to my opinion. Yes, you're entitled to your opinion, but if you've never read something you've got an opinion on, and you've heard it from somewhere else, that's leaving yourself quite open and vulnerable. That's why a lot of times people think they've got a conversation about politics because they watch BBC News or something like that. So they've got a soundbite. But as soon as you know, like one fella said to me, I'm voting Labour. As soon as I asked him why, he couldn't really tell me other than these snippets, you know, and it was ridiculous stuff. You know, he might as well have said, because my dad did. That's why I'm voting Labour. You know, things haven't really moved on. And, you know, when it comes to voting, well, we said this time it would be like shitting your pants and changing your shirt, voting for Starmer. Looks like Alex has decided to go. I wonder if his phone died. Well, we've done just over an hour. I didn't know whether we were going to do any further time anyway. But I thought tonight would be, there's been quite a few people asking me would I start this back up, and there's quite a few people who want to come on and tell their testimonies about how they found out about all the frauds have debilitated the families, destroyed people. You know, I know a few people who've taken their own lives because of council tax debt and things like that, debts that they're not liable for, but they're being enforced. Comes to it that you've just got to, you've got to be able to answer these questions. Where'd you go?
To be honest, there was something that disappeared. I was trying to ask you the question, have we any questions in the chat, because I can't see it. So I thought maybe if anyone's watching.
Why can't you see it? Hang on, why can't you see it? You should where that private chat button was. If you go to the top, it should say comments. You should be able to see that.
No, I've only got the link myself, so I can't see any other questions.
Evening, Steve. Steve Williams. Steve Williams has just put in the chat that A girl who he works with voted Labour because her daughter's favourite colour is red.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, but we shouldn't be surprised. We shouldn't be surprised. I mean, why are more people not tossing a coin? Well, it's only because of a false confidence that they've got, that they know best. They don't know much about politics. They don't know much about the in-depth dealings of these parties. What they've got is a general overview that's very simplistic. You know, oh, Labour are socialist and Labour care about the working man. No, they don't. Not since Tony Blair, maybe at one time. But for the last nearly 30 years, that's been irrelevant since John Smith died of a heart attack. So for 30 years, that's just completely fake. People are still holding on to that notion. Conservatives have to change the position. Lib Dems have. We've now got reform. There is no such thing as a fixed understanding anymore. We're not living in the Marxist world of capitalism and socialism. So, but most people are still sticking to their old categories, their own understandings. People think voting for the Green Party is about the environment. And it's got nothing to do with that. It's political correctness. It's old Labour. It's basically voting for victimology by setting up certain groups and privileges of certain groups as being important to respect. You know, we've got to respect this group and that group and every group other than majorities. And it's just simplistic. And of course, the police can police that and not do any real work because they can just go, oh, somebody complained that this person said this. You know, if you attack, for example, if you have a difference of opinion with a woman, then she can just say, you're a misogynist. If you have a difference of opinion with somebody whose skin colour is different than yours, they can just call you a racist just because the skin colour is different or just because the biological sex is different. Now, when you get into that level of small-mindedness and defensiveness, there's no real interest in a discussion. It's all about shutting the other person down. And this is, unfortunately, where we're at now. Most people don't want an honest discussion because they're not capable of it, because they don't have enough information, because it's too hard. It's too hard. There's too much going on. Most people are living for the weekend and a couple of holidays a year. That's why they accepted the jab, so they could go on holiday. Most people's priorities are saying, I'm alive now, so I want to keep doing what I do now freely. Nothing wrong with that, but it's a short-sighted policy. And if too many people do it, then the Titanic goes down, even though it weren't the Titanic.
Allegedly.
Allegedly, yeah. Was that my first conspiracy theory? Sorry, folks.
Well, how did you get onto this path, Alex? Because I mean,
So,
I know
yeah.
you became born again in your late teens, but how did you get onto the path of knowing that this world was this false?
Very interesting. So I got converted after a Ouija board experience in 1987, right? And I went back to my local evangelical holiness church in the Wesleyan tradition. And what I went back to was something, because I'd attended it before. What I went back to was the understanding that middle-class churchianity exists in many churches. They totally compromise with the culture. It's just a middle-class system, largely aggregated around families, passing on family traditions, superficially resembling the church, with some good things in it. You know, don't get me wrong, it's not all bad. But it clearly wasn't aligned with the radical gospel, right? And I'm a teenager, I'm 19, I'm going, oh, this is still a bit black and white. Oh, this is a bit tepid, a bit lukewarm. And you find all the scriptures to justify that, and you think you know it all at 19. But that was 1987. Now, by 1990, I decided I need to do a theological degree. So I did a bachelor's, then I did a master's, and I studied youth work and so on. But in 1990, we had that first Gulf War. So when I'm there, starting off at theological college, you get into the common room and there's all this coverage about Saddam Hussein. And I started to read Noam Chomsky, who at the time, you know, didn't seem to be so much of a lunatic leftist liberal as he does now in his 90s. To be fair, he is in his 90s. But at the time, he was still coming out. He was still coming out with some good stuff, critiquing American foreign policy. And they still weren't publishing his stuff in the mainstream. He was having to get his works published on Pluto Press. But he did a lot of citizen sort of armchair journalism in his research. And he pointed out that what it was that Iraq were objecting to Kuwait because Kuwait had lowered the price of their oil to such a degree that Iraq couldn't sell their oil. So Iraq went to Kuwait and told them to not keep lowering the price of their oil. But Kuwait were in bed with the Americans. So when Iraq threatened to invade Kuwait if they didn't do something about this embargo, they realized they'd have to contact the big chiefs, which was the United States. And the United States said, yeah, we have no interest in regional disputes. So then they thought they had the green light to go in because the US...
Didn't the British say that over Poland with Hitler?
Well, of course, and it's a standard playbook. So then at the time, of course, I was 22 in 1990. I'm starting this theology degree. I'm getting exposed to this in the common room. And suddenly I'm reading some Chomsky and thinking, oh, right, so this guy was set up. Then I'm back to 1953, Saddam Hussein, installed by the British as a client, as a puppet. And it's only when he stops obeying his masters that a problem appears. Of course, after the Second World War, then America takes over the assets of the British Empire. So it just moves from British control to US control. And of course, he's not playing ball. So you just get told the story like they did with Hitler. Oh, he's aggressively invaded Poland. Oh, Saddam has invaded Kuwait. Oh, he's a threat. And then later, when they did the Second Gulf War, it was this 45 minutes to get this warhead and, you know, all that total fabricated research. So you'd had 9/11 then by 2001, but by 1990, it became pretty clear to me that the world was not as it appeared. That in international relations, there were dirty tricks going on, setups going on, traps for people to fall into who were being put in untenable positions, walking into the trap, and that created justification for invasion. Soon as I knew that, my trust, because up until that point, my trust in government had been implicit. I was like anybody else. Work hard, pay your bills wasn't my mantra. It was, why would you not trust government? Why would it work against you? Why would it fight against its own people? I had no reason to even question. Now, all of a sudden, this massive conflict, and you realize it was manufactured, and then it just goes from bad to worse. And then 9/11 put the seal on it. So I started to realize more and more that the world wasn't remotely what I thought it was like. But it was only in 2013, 2014, when I got involved in a local group in Bolton, that I started to get more specific information. So I'd probably known for over 20 years that there was definitely something profoundly wrong, but I still didn't understand the extent of it. So yeah, it was a long process, but it started in 1990.
Yeah, my process only started when, like I said, the process of after this life, what happens when you're dead, that started from when my dad was killed. It accentuated again when my mum died, and then that's where I ended up doing mediumship. So that was one aspect of it. And at the time, going in 2010, I was doing free readings for people. You know, I'd been asked to go around spiritualist churches to do messages because I was good at it. People, wherever I got these messages from, people were taking them. I started to do readings at home, only just free readings for family and that, and friends. And they were going quite well. And then one day, these 3 people turned up, and each one I sat with, completely blank. I couldn't force anything. There was something had just switched off. And then because I weren't charging, it was just a brew and a chat after that type thing for us all. Anyway, next day is the first letter from court through the letterbox. That's where it was like everything's switched off now. You're learning this, and it was so basic, Alex, because Her Majesty's Courts and Tribunals service, they offer a service. It can't be compulsory. They can't mean I have to have it, because that would mean that the manager of B&Q can come running out, drag me in and make me buy a hammer and some nails. It doesn't work like this. So I just said to the first judge, look, I'm not signing anything. I don't want your service. If she sells her half of the property to someone, I'll deal with that. And that was the first judge. And the first judge just went, oh, right. Oh, okay. Well, there's nothing we can do. 2 weeks later, I'm brought in to a different judge who's telling me that they're going to sell my house. that was when I started to learn all this. In my court case, mortgage fraud came out. The property fraud, meaning that because of us being idiots, we're signing all our property into commercial jurisdiction. You know, every time somebody registers a property with the Mr., Miss, Mrs., it's under presumption it goes into commercial jurisdiction. Once it gets that commercial jurisdiction, council tax now applies, and full authority is given to the county courts over all commerce. So all of a sudden, I'm acting as a shopkeeper, using my shop, and I'm saying I'm not paying these bills. It creates conflict. You took up an adversarial position against yourself, believe it or not, because they're defending the creditor. They're defending Mr. Paul Webster. And I'm saying I'm not doing this. And they're not recognising me as Mr. Paul Webster. They're recognising me as a shopkeeper. Honestly, it's so silly. It's so silly how it works. Because if you knew that that's what they were doing, you wouldn't do it. But we don't care. We just say, well, this is what we do. Look at this, I've got my deeds. Well, what does it say? It's my title. So you own title. You don't own a brick. You don't own the property. So people ask questions now, well, can we take our property out of that and put in the correct? Yes, you must be able to. There must be a correct jurisdiction. But who's doing it? Who's researching it? Who has done it? People have put stuff into trusts. I know trusts work. But all these fragments need to start coming together. But the truth movements, when they've all come together, they all get co-opted and people just argue and fall out with each other.
Yeah.
And end up doing nothing. You know that from the constitutional law stuff.
Yeah, I do. Yeah. It's part of this polarization that exists within notions of truth. It's hopelessly labyrinthine. So like I say, it's not just a jungle, it's a labyrinth. And this is why I think we've got to focus, like I say, more on people's desire to live. The survival instinct's underrated. How bad do you want it? It's the same with Christians. Do you want to go to church and have an opinion or hold to a particular theology and feel self-satisfied that you got something right? Like doing a page of equations, getting them all right and getting a gold star from the teacher. I mean, is that the goal of having a correct theology? Or is it because you want to get that right because you really want to know God, because you want to have communion with the one who created you? You don't want to live surrounded by a world that's insane. So you're trying to find a standard of sanity, first of all in yourself, secondly in the ecosystem which supports you, which at one time we might have seen as being churches, but like I said, churches have been compromised. How many of them were not enforcing masks or shutting down under COVID? So the problem that we've got is, where do we find authentic communities that are actually spiritually vibrant, in our case, within the authentic Christian tradition? Because, you know, the church itself has not done itself many favors down the centuries. Its track record is pretty much abysmal in many ways, and yet in other ways, it's done an admirable job in certain examples. And it's always a mixed bag, is life. But the problem now for us is, well, how are we going to find this core community that supports these values, so that, again, I want to be alive. I'm not scared of death, but I want to live like I mean it. I don't just want to, roll over and die, play dead. So we need a vision by which we can step forward. Now, at one time in the Old Testament, it would have been the prophets. Because the prophets said, I mean, particularly in Jeremiah and Ezekiel, God had to say, I'm going to have to call them back to myself. The harlots, they've gone astray. They've got a heart of stone. They're following laws so prescriptively, laws about fasting, laws about this, but not understanding the spirit of it, neglecting widows and orphans. There was no social aspect to it. There was no charity, no care, no heartbeat. So the message of the prophet seemed to be, look, a dead legal code is not going to cut it with God. You want a living, vibrant relationship. And he said, when people come to me with all their heart, then they will be found. I will be found by them. And basically, I will replace the heart of stone that is in them with a beating heart of flesh. That's called being alive. being fully alive rather than half alive, comatose, or dead. So it comes to free will again, regardless of what ideological system, theological system, belief system. Do you want to be united with the source of your existence? We believe that's God in Christ. But the driving force within a human being is, do I want to be real? Do I want to be alive? How much do I want it? And if I'll settle for something else, well, I'll reap the consequence of that. Yeah, I'm living for the weekend. Right then, fill your boots. But Monday's coming again. You'll go to work again. Your pressures will be there again. So if you want to be on that treadmill, on that gerbil wheel, fair enough. You've got the choice to stay on it. If you're looking for something more, you can start to explore, can't you? So we rely on God to place a calling on us, but it's up to us to want to live, to respond to that calling. And for me, I can't see that if people don't wake up to that and they're not looking for more and they're just satisfied with the limits of their own experience, well, they're already drowning in it in many cases. The quality of life's going down. The life prospects are being eroded. Life expectancy is coming down. So it's not a pretty picture. So do we want to be hanging on by our fingertips to the edge of the cliff, or do we want more? And every person watching this has got that choice. Every single one. How bad do you want it?
Well, I have to say, I mean, I've seen a couple of comments in the chat room that there are people that are people who I never thought of waking up. There's a lot of people who like full well, Alex, that I've been bombarded with messages over this stuff. And a lot of them are, quite educated, switched on people. Yeah. And they're running down all these rabbit holes that, we went down. I'm privy to courts where somebody said with a utility company, I'm a man. In a county courtroom, I'm a man. And the judges looked at the utility company and said, he says he's a man. We agree. Okay. And then I've no contract. And the judges looked over to him and said, he says he's no contract. Yep, we agree there's no contract. And then the judges just looked back at him and said, so how are you going to pay this? Now, if the argument was as simple as I've no contract and I'm a man, it would all be done and dusted, wouldn't it? But what that did was it set up an ability for people, whoever they were, but it was an ability for people to be labelled free man. And every time people were putting in paperwork, if it was against the system, they would be labelled freeman. And then that would mean judges who didn't know particularly what we were doing or didn't care would just find against people. That's why we went in with the straw man name, with the the legislation, because at the end of the day, banks don't lend money. They can't lend money. They facilitate a credit agreement between a debtor and a creditor. I'm both. But the problem is I've given power of attorney for the bank to act as me for 25 bloody years. So we don't know this. And we can't stand in a room, Alex, and go, you never told me that. Because ignorance of the law is no excuse. So everything's been stacked against us. When we found it all out and we went back after him, if you'd have seen it, well, you did see it 10 years ago, but if other people had seen it in the courts, they were running around like chickens with their heads cut off. They didn't know what to do. Somebody turned up with a check to get rid of a gas bill, to set it off, and they wanted to do it correctly. No, they didn't understand it. They had to go and find out. This is why all the hearings got, we had warrants taken out of the bundles in the corridors. They just didn't know what to do with it. But after 2017, they made a decision in the courts, and the court said, apply for your warrants, we'll give them you. Don't worry about it, because they'll have to come to us and we'll deal with them. And you go to a court, and if you go as a defendant against a warrant, you might as well not bother. That's how they were talking. But when I was in court, the district judge told me, because the gas agent never turned up against me, so I asked to claim summary judgment. And he said, I can't give you summary judgment. I said, why? If they'd turned up and I hadn't, you'd have given it to them. He says, yes, I would. And I said, well, where's my remedy? He said, become claimant, which means people now who can't get the joint gyro slip, they're going to have to sue their agents in court to get that remedy. But then it's going to have to come out that the house, the property is deemed commercial, so they're doing nothing wrong. So then are you going to have to prove that the property is not commercial? Because then this opens up the council tax.
Yeah.
It opens up everything. That gyro check opened up everything. That's why 10 years ago I needed people. I needed people to be interested, but people could afford to pay and they weren't interested. But now people can't afford it because they've put the gas prices up so much, and it's because people are paying. People want to know how people get away with just not paying anything. Nobody does. They all take the hits. I can't take everything on. I don't know anybody who can, and the people who I do know took everything on disappeared. Some people who were very much on the scene 10 years ago, you don't hear hide nor hear of them now because they got into some sticky situations over doing everything, trying to take everything on. This system is a Luciferian system and it's all against you. And as soon as you stand up against it on your own, they want to make an example. I had to talk a woman out of saying she didn't want to pay council tax. And the reason she didn't want to pay it was because it funds terrorism. And I said, do you own your house? She said, yeah. And she told me where she lived, and I knew it was worth about 160 grand in equity. So that's full 160 grand equity. I says, please don't stand in a courtroom or say that you're not paying that tax because of terrorism, because they will make an example of you and take that property. The factor is that it's a commercial property. Her property that's been paid off is registered in commercial jurisdiction. Legally, they're doing nothing wrong. This is what the problem is. This is why it's got to come to a point, and you can't protest this stuff. You've got to reject it, and then you've got to make strides forward. Well, we've got people say to me, well, there's no point going into a court because you said it's all corrupt. If you don't go into a court and put them into a corner, how will you know? We always said that if you get a judge and you've got him, put him in a corner, but give him an out. Don't just box him in there. Give him an out. And they'll take it the majority of the time. But it's come to it now where different people who wouldn't want to get involved in this stuff have no choice. But don't rely on others. I had somebody contact me 2 days ago offering me money to take a court case on. Not doing it. I'll sit and talk with people, go over information for hours. Alex, how often I do that. But there's no way I'm doing it for someone else, because the reason we're in this position is because we don't know how to do it for ourselves. And there's people there people are investigating how to operate their own accounting, which is what we should have been doing from the age of 21. Well, this is how we've got to start looking. But is it too little too late, like you said?
Well, okay, so one little thing I just say about this is, we know it says in the Bible, vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, I will repay. Which basically means don't take matters into your own hands. Don't become vigilante if you really trust God. So, but we can't talk about justice and injustice in the world if as human beings we're not trying to live justly and rightly and work against injustice. So the problem is, it is both our responsibility and not our responsibility. So if you come up against a bigger power, like, say, a local authority, it is always going to crush the individual. You won't be able to overturn its principles, but you could fight it on an individual basis. Now, there is a certain degree of merit and responsibility to fight against injustice and evil, because we know that God does. However, I know it's a vengeance text, but there's a fine line between us understanding the limits of our competence, our jurisdiction, and that which is beyond what we can be expected to achieve. So we could stand in God's way by taking things on board ourselves, or we could expect God to bail us out because of a refusal to step up and take responsibility. And I think we've gone too much to say, that we're not stepping up and taking responsibility. So I think we do need to step up more and take responsibility, but not in such a way where we're on a justice crusade, where we mistakenly believe that we will have the power to turn that around. We can make an impact, but it's just going to be like case law. It's going to be establishing precedents. So for some battles, we've got to make the judgment to fight them, and other battles, we've got to make a judgment not to fight them. And it's never clear, because we might have a general principle in the Bible or for morality and ethics, but in any given situation, no book that was written in the past can define for us what we need to do in each instance, which means we have to struggle, we have to wrestle, we have to weigh up, is it worth my while? Is it going to exhaust and drain me? Am I standing in God's way? At the same time, he's saying, am I copping out? Am I not taking responsibility? Am I saying there's nothing I can do? Nobody knows where that line is, Paul. But we've all got to try and find out where it is in our personal lives. When they come for you, if you've got no solidarity, do you fight against them? Do you try and recruit brothers in arms? What do you do? So it's a very difficult call, a very difficult decision to know when we should act in human strength based on principles of justice and when we should not do so and leave it to God. And I suspect it'll never come from a principle. It'll come from a personal walk with God. If you're not communicating with God, you're not reading the word of God, you're not in prayer, if you've not got a spiritual life, if you're not devoted, then you're not going to hear the voice of God. So you're going to be left to use the machinations of the mind, your own intellect, which has got its strong points, but it's got its limits. So if people are not waiting on God, they won't know that point. They won't know how to discern which battles they should and shouldn't take on board. I don't think it's a simple case of one extreme or the other. We've got to dance a really fine dance between the two.
Well, I just know that if I have took everything on, materially, I lost everything. They stole everything off me materially.
Yeah.
But my sanity was what I was just barely holding on to because of what these people did.
Yeah, exactly.
It's you're trying to, you're being surrounded by armed police. 2 days previous, Alex, I've been handcuffed to an armed robber at Warrington General. There's no police in sight. This is one of the great things of being an ex-prison officer. I've got a bank robber attached to me, no armed police. I don't want to sell my house. I'm led into a courtroom with 6 armed police around me. There's something wrong in this world.
Yeah.
And you think, well, what's all the lies about? Well, it's lies about everything. And so everything that they tell me is lies, then I've got to look with an aspect of saying, well, where's the truth in it? And it came down to the fundamentals of everything. There's nothing I've ever been taught that I don't question. One of the greatest things that people thought they could ever throw at me was that they thought that I thought the earth was flat. I've told you many a time I don't know what shape it is, but it's starting to impress on me about a spinning ball on a wobble at 1,000 miles an hour, not going concentric circles, which is what I was taught. No, we chase the sun now at 67,000 miles an hour on a galactic plane at 500,000 miles an hour. And I go, hang on a minute, I've got a few questions about this. Why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you have questions about it? That was my point. And when people can only call your names, they haven't got anything to say about it either. I've done it all. You can tell me that I'm a knobhead because I said your gas is free. But when I've said, well, have you read this Bills of Exchange? No, I've got a life. Well, guess what? Those people who had lives now suddenly are seeing those lives curtailed and crunched in because they can't put the gas on. They can't watch the TV. They can't do all this stuff because they can't afford it.
So,
you're talking about people who are now motivated, being motivated. I'm part of some groups where I'm seeing dozens of people turning up at people's houses where bailiffs are coming and evicting. We just had one poor lady who was evicted. She had stage 4 cancer. She was carried out of a bed and down the stairs and evicted. You know, she passed away in hospital after that. This is where we're at. People are saying you can't keep doing this. And these people are not turning up just for a fight. These people are turning up articulate with paperwork. You know, and the police now are not knowing what to do. They've gone from carrying Cytex with bailiffs to help board the bloody houses up to going, ooh, we don't know what to do here. Well, you know, they don't work for us at the end of the day, but people saying no is better than a protest. Protest is a legal acceptance. You know, Rob Menard described the word protest very well ages ago, where he said your kids, when you say, come on kids, it's bedtime, they have a right to protest that they're not going to bed, stamp the feet, blah, 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 do whatever. But where do they end up, Alex? In bed. So they can protest, they're legally acceptable. You can protest about it, but it's still coming through. But you have your song and dance about it. But if you turn up and say no, that's different to protesting. You know, when you protest on the M25, you need a license and a police escort to get you to the M25 before you can glue yourself to it. You know, that's the stupidity about this. And we're fed this through media. You know, at some point, you've got to grow up. You've got to grow up. You stop drinking milk and have some meat. You've got to grow up from this. You can't vote Labour because your dad did. Because, like I said before you got cut off, it's like shitting your pants and changing your shirt, what's happened. We've gone from Conservatives back to Labour, who straight away, Angela Rayner said, every borough will get the first share of migrants. They're changing the culture of everything in this country, and they want us to fight with each other while they run away with everything else and then collapse it. And you said you can't see how this society can flip. You know, at the end of the day, Alex, there was a time with during John Wesley's time where there was a revival. You know, England would have been gone. It would have been done and dusted. It was so corrupt.
Yeah.
And then because Tinsdale printed the Bible in the English language and Wesley and everybody was preaching it, there was a revival in England. It was set on fire. That's how we became a Christian country again. Yeah. But what part of this country is Christian now? It's getting less and less and less. When you've got the churches that are turning against what the Bible says as well, you can see how corrupt this country is. That's going to take a hell of a revival, and that's out of our hands, right?
I mean, metaphorically, what I'd say, people might not be impressed by metaphors, but actually, I think they're sometimes better than approaches based on so-called fact. Like, you know, there's so much noise in the world now. There's so many opinions in the marketplace of ideas that everyone's shouting, right? You saw it in the Christian mysticism group on Facebook. Everyone's shouting and trying to shout louder than the next person. So it's just a din. It's just noise everywhere, noise. You can't even pick out any truth. So, of course, people think that shouting louder gives you a better chance of getting heard. But actually, it seems to me, when we're talking about truth, that the voice of God is more like a whisper. And that's what distinguishes it, because truth should have a calm composure to it. It shouldn't have that level of competitive shouting over the noise of others, competing with the voice of other noise by raising your own noise. To me, truth is like an anchor. It's a rock within the soul. It's conscience, God speaking to us through conscience. That can never be snuffed out unless we allow it to be snuffed out. So if we take time, if we set aside time and space to reflect and be congruent and authentic, then we can hear something that's a whisper, but that speaks with great power. And I think that we lack that composure. You don't see it really in politics. You don't see it in many places in society. So I think we need to take a different approach to personal confidence.
In what respect? Personal confidence?
Well, I mean, people are not anchored, you could say, in God, but it's really in themselves. It's themselves in a relationship with God from a Christian perspective. But people are subject to being tossed here and there by, every doctrine, every opinion, every theory, and they just accept it. Oh, this person said this. They don't critically explore it. Oh, I like the sound of that. Oh, that suits me. Yeah, I like that. I'll just adopt that as my own idea. They've not built into themselves. Jesus said the difference between the wise and foolish builder is the one who builds upon a rock rather than upon sand. Because when the tests come, that building will get found out. Do people want to lay foundations in their own life? If you just live from moment to moment, hand to mouth, living for the weekend and the next holiday, you have got no roots. You've got no foundations. If you don't work on yourself, if you don't struggle, if you don't wrestle, it might not be a very appealing prospect. Oh, I don't want to do that. Well, why not? Well, because I prefer being lazy and I prefer just the easy path. So if you keep taking the easy path, it's like when people, if they go to the gym, they work out to get muscles to be physically fit. If you don't do that on an equivalent level in spiritual discipline, if you don't take control of your own life, you'll just be drifting. You'll get tossed about by every kind of opinion. You won't have a voice of your own. You won't be deeper. You won't have good foundations. So this is the major problem. Most people are just in ostrich syndrome, sticking their head in the sand, living for the weekend. And unless they decide that they want that to change and they exercise their free will to build foundations, have discipline, seek something deeper, then they're going to inherit the consequence of the frivolous relationship to their own existence.
Well, the thing is, like I always said, people don't tend to do anything about things unless they start to struggle. When you've had everything taken, you've got nothing left, and you wake up saying, "I don't want to be here this morning." There's nothing left that they can take. You're basically done. That's rock bottom. Well, you can still think that you've got something that you can do that can make things better, that you can pay this and you can do that. Oh, and if I can get to that day, hey, then I can go away for a week to Magaluf or whatever. That's how you're going to live. But it's when things start getting curbed. The trouble, that how I look at it, Alex, is those people who can carry on with everything until it affects them. By the time it affects them, they're the ones that are in the middle. The ones that I always say, there's 20% of knobheads like me and you who say, hey, there's something wrong. And then you've got 20% of people that say, you're an idiot. There's nothing wrong here. Our government loves us. They do everything, blah, blah, blah. Then you've got 60% in the middle that don't do anything, are apathetic. They don't bother. That 60% basically put people on cattle cars in Germany. The ones who didn't do anything. The good people who did nothing until it came and knocked on their door. Once it knocked on their door, that was it. That was the game changer. But as Martin Niemöller's famous quote said, when they came for me, there was nobody left because they'd taken everybody else. I said nothing when they came for everyone else, but when they came for me, there was nobody left. So what do we do? Do we just keep going down this path until, let's say for argument's sake, we're all in camps? We're in camps and looking at each other, not being able to speak and going, if only we'd have done this.
It's right, Paul, but I'll tell you what, I think the answer to that question is, you remember our pal Enoch, early in Genesis? Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him 365 years, right? And all the others were living between 777, 969 Methuselah. So he's taken it 365 days in a year. It's talking about the completeness. Every day of the year, Enoch walked with God. So if we don't walk with God, that was the original template for Eden. So if we don't walk with God, we don't walk in the spirit, we're walking according to the flesh, then all the things we hear with our ears, all the things we see with our eyes are going to be part of this fallen setup. We'll get deceived, we'll get misled, we'll be led astray, because we don't have the diligence to walk with the only one who can keep us on the straight and narrow. We are in turbulent times. And you don't need faith. You can chance your arm. You can just walk through life and imagine you'll get through that minefield.
Do you know what though, Alex? I think there's a big part of common sense before we get to the aspect of being with God or anything like that. It was the common sense. I knew people who I thought had common sense who within a matter of 3 months had been jabbed 3 times, and it was to go on holiday. Or it was for their job because they weren't going to keep the job. We now see that none of that was true, but it was pressured. You know, you've got the Australian ex-Prime Minister who says, no, we didn't force anybody. It was up to them. You know, saying, well, you're going to lose your job. You don't have to have it, but you're going to lose your job. That's not forcing them. That's coercion. Of course it's forced. But there was common sense there, Alex. Common sense went out the window. You know, I've seen people who, you know, people I've known 30 years throw themselves into bushes because somebody walked too close to them. There was something wrong with the psyche. You know, the common sense had been destroyed. It was everybody. It was like somebody had done a magic spell and everybody had just bought in to that delusion. And then there was some of us walking around going, "What are you doing?" Well, it's COVID. It's this. It's that. You can't do this. You can't do that. What do you mean? You mean if I walk that way down that aisle in this supermarket, I'm going to die? Well, you could. So I've got to follow these arrows. You know, it was strange seeing people queuing around car parks with trolleys waiting to go in. You know, it was what's going on. It was that I thought zombie apocalypse was already here, especially when Amazon's got it written into their insurance policies. You're thinking, this can't be real. It can't be real. People I've known all my life had suddenly changed like that, and it was over fear. There was a lack of common sense, let alone with God. I mean, when you mentioned churches that people who I knew were going to churches, they were not only putting masks on, but they were saying that we can't congregate. They weren't meeting. You know, pastors having double jabs. That bothers me. You know, it bothers me that.
Yeah. I think if you view life as a series of interconnected paths with junctures and junctions where you have to make decisions, at each junction point, let's just simplify it and say there's 2 paths you can take. We obviously know there's more than 2, but just say the easy path and the hard path every time. So let's just say the easy path's always to the left and the hard path's always to the right. It's very difficult for people to be on the hard path all the time when you're living a limited human life. But if you stay on the left path, the easy path all the time, easy path, easy path, easy path, easy path, don't climb up any hills, can't be bothered with that, don't want to get out of breath. So that's going to affect your physical health and where you end up, always choosing the easy path. Some people do that, and the reason we're in the problem that we're in today is most people, given a choice between an easy path and a harder path, will choose the easier path. That's because people have become lazy. They're short term. Everything's about short term. Look at credit culture. Oh yeah, if I buy this now on this piece of plastic, I've not really bought it, but I can pay for it later. But I want the product now. I want it now. I want all the payoffs now. What happened to the Tower of Babel? Yeah, we want to go up to heaven now. God said, no, be fruitful and multiply, fill the whole earth. Before you have any pretensions of going upwards, conquer the horizontal, lay the right foundations. But they were impatient. No, we're not doing that. We're not going to gain the mundane knowledge we need in order to be able to build upwards properly. You're going to give the nuclear codes to a baby who's not capable of deploying any intelligence or wisdom about nuclear weaponry. So this is what we're dealing with. Because we choose the easy path, we become intellectually sloppy, lazy, and ill-equipped to navigate life. If you take the hard path, you learn stuff. Through suffering, you gain insight. You get better priorities. They talk about being born with a silver spoon in your mouth. Yeah, they get the rewards, but they do no work because they get some butler to do everything for them. But if your butler disappears or your money runs out, you're disempowered. You're as unskilled as a baby. So these shortcuts don't really work unless you rely on other people. If you're going to be strong, if you're going to have good foundations in yourself, you can't just keep choosing the easy path at every junction. You've got to say, How bad do I want to thrive? How much do I want to learn? Do I want to overcome these challenges in life, or do I want to shrink back? It's a simple choice for everyone, Paul, and it transcends your final destination. Because God gave human beings life. It's a gift. It's a gift. You can do with it whatever you want. So what am I going to do with it? That's the essential. What are you going to do with your life, folks? Am I going to choose the easy path, or am I going to choose the one that's a bit tougher? That's it, isn't it?
Sometimes you don't have a choice to what path you choose. You're just thrown onto your path. And then, you know, my mum always taught me that if you think you're right about something, Paul, defend it. Defend yourself. So I defended myself, and I saw what happened. You know, it's really interesting to see what other people's take is on stuff, because a lot of the people that get in touch with me, they've not been through the courts and done stuff like that. They're watching videos, they've got ideas. The information-wise, they can talk a good game. They know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
But it's different to going into a court and knowing what doesn't work.
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot of people who say, oh, all you've got to do is this and say this, and they'll shut the court and they'll leave and they'll come back in. I've seen all that done, and I've seen it all happen. But the court case always comes back around. You know, I know lads who've taken houses back 4 years. They've heard nothing. All of a sudden, they're defending the same property again now. They don't go away. They go away and they reconvene. What can we do? What can we do? And the courts get involved, and they get all the barristers together and say, well, just do this and we'll take it from there. We'll get the police. We'll tell the police to just do this, because it all becomes public policy. I mean, where are you going to defend the fact that the bailiff has turned up for a gas meter change? He wants to fit a smart meter, and he's turned up with no wet ink signature, yet under the energy bill, the legislation that's been passed through Parliament is that police have powers to red key the door for the refusal of smart meters. Where do we go now? Because they're not using that legislation, they said, but it's in the legislation. So where do we go then? You know, wet ink signature, bang! What you doing? You know, we had the tactical aid unit in 2015, red key a semi-detached property in Moston on behalf of bailiffs. The tactical aid unit, who paid for that? Who paid for the armed police? And then the over the 30 coppers over the first 5 hearings of my case. That's 2 cases. How many cases have the police been involved in? And who's paying for that? And it's all to cover up all this fraud.
Well, see, again, I come back to a simple. Well, again, I'm just on the theological point. I think I just want to double down on this point. You know, before, just as God called his prophet Moses to emancipate his people who were under the burden of slavery to the Egyptians and Pharaoh, he called to Moses at the burning bush, and the first thing he said to Moses, he said, Moses, take off your shoes, because the ground where you are standing is holy ground. Anybody who reads the Bible will not be in Moses' shoes again. So that story, you know, it happened. And people then say, okay, so there was this holy ground outside of Moses. Now, for me, for that story to be applicable and relevant to all people who read it, before emancipation takes place, the holy ground needs to be inside of you, not outside of you. There's no external locus of control. There's no external rescue, because when God rescued his people Israel from the oppressor after all those trials and plagues and departing the Red Sea, they were still grumbling and moaning. God was providing a pillar of fire and a pillar of cloud to guide them. He was providing manna from heaven to feed them, and yet they had to stay for 40 years in the wilderness because they were grumbling. So they were liberated from an external secular oppressor in Pharaoh who had external power, who was taking the freedom away. And the holiness that God identified was in his presence, in the physical ground. But the message for us is that ground has got to be inside of you, because if it isn't, you'll still keep grumbling. God will deliver you. You'll be delivered from the secular power, but you'll still not be delivered from yourself, because we're our own biggest tyrants. So unless God walks with you, you're always going to lose.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very strange, isn't it? I mean, it's been a little bit cathartic. You know how many times I've put this podcast off, don't you?
Yeah, man. Yeah.
With the stuff that I've been going through, it's nice. I thought we'd only do an hour, but we're coming up for 2 hours now, so I think we're coming up to a nice ending to
it's been
for tonight. Like I said, I'm looking to get more people on with us, Alex.
Yeah.
Come and tell us their stories.
Yeah, totally.
To find out what they've done, if they've done anything, what they want to do, how they found out that this world is what it is.
Yeah, we need to hear from other people, Paul. You're quite right. We've got to hear other people's stories, authentic stories, because when I talk about people wanting, needing to feel alive, if you can't tell your story, if you've suppressed it, if you believe people will ridicule it, you'll shut yourself down. Don't shut yourself down. Tell your story. Step up. Use your vocal cords. Free yourself. Tell your story. And seek people who will validate you in your story, who will come alongside as brothers in arms, because we do have to come together, humanly speaking. But it starts with finding our voice, having the courage to step up. So, yeah, I'm totally behind that, Paul. Let's get as many people as possible on to tell their story, and then we can engage and share our stories and find solutions with each other.
Also, we find out what mistakes people have made as well, because people make mistakes and it helps somebody else on the next line. That's why, keep arguing with these people, with utilities in particular, that I have no contract. They don't care. They haven't got a contract. They're not bothered about contracts.
Yeah, exactly.
Get to the simplicity. We've got to start keeping all this stuff simple. We don't need to complicate it. Find out how simple it is. If it means that the property that's been registered has been put into commercial, well, that's something that has to be remedied.
Yeah.
How we do that and who has done it and who hasn't.
Yeah, good.
This is what we need to find out.
Totally, Paul. Yeah, totally with you. Yeah. That level of truth is still very clear. That truth is related to the facts about how the world works. That's the most important truth to understand when it comes to daily living. How does this thing work? How do I make it work? And we're back to Rockefeller again. We've been disempowered for many, many decades, well over 100 years. We've got to take that power back so we understand what's what, and so that common people know what their rights are. Not in a very cliched sense, but I know where the line is, and I'm not letting you cross it. But people don't know where the line is anymore, so we've got to help them find out where it is again.
Oh, well, it's bloody hard work.
Yeah. Well,
I remember people, 10 years ago keep saying, let me know how you get on, Webby, and then I'll do it. Or something like that. It was nobody was interested. And then when I did that gas, water and electric's free video in September 21, and they put the prices up in April 22, it jumped from 1,000 hits in February to over 13,000 hits when we hit mid-April going into May, because people wanted, they couldn't afford it. And it's not about, people have got to learn the language. You're not getting away with, you're not doing anything like that. This is how the system's meant to work. It's just, if we act differently in it, we're treated differently in it. It's all about, that's what it's all about. And we were taught to do this. So
people love cheerleaders, Paul. The people love cheerleaders, and they love a good movie. Because a cheerleader is safely on the sidelines, cheering somebody on, hoping they do well, but hoping that they don't have to step up. That's why they're cheerleading. Oh, let's watch a nice movie. Yeah, that movie was really inspiring. But it's when the tyrants are roared. That's the difficult thing for people. And it needs courageous people like Scott of the Antarctic. It needs the pioneer. It needs the person who steps up to put their head above the parapet. Most people, rightly, are concerned about that because you become a target. So you need courage.
It's like this comment that's on the screen now from Dorian Gray. Utility companies, registered credit brokers selling debt. I don't look at it like this. When they're acting as an agent, so I'm being treated as creditor, they're acting as agent for me, so they issue me a joint gyro to set it off. They're not selling me anything. They're just an agent that steps in between for that so that the bill can be set off. When I'm treated as a customer, the revenue collectors working as subcontractors for the government on behalf of the taxpayer. So I don't see it as that. I can see how it can be envisaged that these people are trying to pretend they're selling something because that's how they act. They are trying to sell you a package of something. But I don't feel that that is actually how it works. I feel that no matter what agent you've got, from Octopus, Scottish Power, E.ON, British Gas, for a creditor, they act as an agent. So they generate the bill from the meter. I'm not being charged for the meter. I'm not doing anything like that. They generate the bill from that meter. I set that off. When they generate the bill for a customer, I must pay it because that's a shopkeeper. So they're either acting as an agent on behalf of the taxpayer or a revenue collector on behalf of the taxpayer. There's no need, for me anyway, there's no need to complicate it further than that.
Yeah.
So do you want to just wrap up, Alex, then? Because we've just gone over now. So we'll see if we can get anybody on for next week, because I appreciate you coming on with me and helping me to get started back up. And I look forward to more conversations, and
pleasure, mate.
We can start talking about the nitty-gritties, because I can only see things getting worse on the world earthly economic front in any case.
The way I see it here, Paul, is right. I mean, the tech, it's really decent, this StreamYard, right? So for me, if we can get better tuned in to seeing comments coming up and invite questions, then we can have more of a dialogue-based approach anyway, including more, because we're dialoguing anyway. We're sharing our ideas. We're just two faces on the screen to everybody else, So, but everybody else will think, oh, I've got an opinion about that, or oh, that's crap, or oh, I like that. But if we give those people a voice, we can make it more interactive. And if we can get a solid base of people with some smart things to say that can help people out, then let's extend the conversation. But we need constructive discussion, and questions from the floor really help. So I'd be all for that as well.
Well, thanks a lot for coming on, mate, and giving up
some
time.
Thanks for hosting.
Well, I didn't know whether I'd do it or not, but
you did.
It felt all right. It felt all right for the first time back, anyway.
Yeah.
So we'll pencil this time next week in again, and see if anybody's interested in coming on for a chat with us.
Yeah, I might actually have, funnily enough, I've got Evensong for the first time. I'm actually going to go to this service, and I think, is that 6 till 7? So what time? We officially met at 7:30, didn't we?
Yeah.
But yes, I should be okay for 7:30. I'm pretty sure it's 6 till 7.
Let me know. I can always we'll put it for Sunday. It doesn't have to be 7:30. But we'll put it for next week, because Sunday night seems to be okay for both of us.
Yeah, 7:30, 7:45, something like that should be fine.
All right, brother. Thanks a lot, mate.
Thanks,
if you just hang on behind before we finish. So.
Yeah, no worries, pal.
All right, mate.
Catch you later. Nice one.
Thanks.
Bye for now.
Thanks, pal. So, thanks for those who've come on live and listened to us having a bit of a rant and a rave about stuff. Obviously, we've not gone in too deep because it is the first podcast back. But we've touched on a lot of light stuff that people should have questions about. At the end of the day, if you've no questions, then you're just going to get sucked into all of this. you know, if you've got kids, especially, they deserve better. I know my kid did. I have to fight because I've taught my kid the same stuff, and if I'm not going to fight, who is? You know, we've got to start looking at this stuff anyway, guys. So, with that, I'd like to say good night, God bless, and let's have a bit of thinking.
Your gas is free, your gas is free, in a debt-based economy. Your gas is free, your gas is free, in a debt-based economy. Your gas is free, your gas is free, in a debt-based economy. Your gas is free, your gas is free, in a debt-based economy. Here's the Webster Report with Paul the Gasman Webster.